Hello. Yeah, that's my name up there. Yeah, it's an honor to be here today, and particularly be giving the opportunity to be able to share some of my learnings and some of my concerns, and not least projections for the future of transport and mobility. As mentioned, my name is Peter Bardenfleth-Hansen, and I am a very sort of odd and very rare species in that I'm a veteran in a brand new era of mobility. For the past decade, I've had the privilege to work in Tesla, as mentioned. I've recently stopped, but it's still this story that I'm going to be telling you, and also the story and the journey that has brought me here before you. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my time in Tesla, my take on the future, and most importantly, as also mentioned earlier, I would like to engage you all in a Q&A that generally sort of opens up, and it's always a lot more interesting when you all are engaged in that conversation. And remember, there's no such thing as a stupid question. So back in 2009, in connection with the climate conference COP15, which was held in Copenhagen, Denmark, I was searching for an opportunity to contribute towards the growing concerns of climate change. And I was approached by a small startup back then, doing electrical cars, and they needed volunteers to help promote their electrical sports car called the Roadster. This also happened to be that European conference that was first attended by the newly appointed Barack Obama, and there was a lot of press on Copenhagen at the time. I was then given, as luck would have it, the opportunity to open up Tesla in Scandinavia. Back then, it was a small company of about 500 people globally, of which only about 50 were in Europe. Today, that number is 50,000, so it's grown a little bit since then. Scandinavia was a huge success. That became Northern Europe. We went to Benelux, the UK, and so forth. And I even had the opportunity to help out with the opening of our facilities in Japan. Had the ability, if I like to call it that, to convert the hardened oil sheiks of the Middle East. So now they're driving electrical cars. And through these many years of experiences, it's given me some sort of perspective of what it takes to change the nature of mobility, whilst also highlighting the many challenges therein. As a person, though, I am very, very concerned that my children will inherit a planet that is in a terrible state that may be even beyond repair. And I'm probably not going to be the first person who's saying this and preaching this, and I'm unfortunately not going to be the last either. But what I do hope is that I can inspire some of you very smart people in here to start instigating change on a personal level, on a company level, in such a way that we can actually change the way that the trajectory has been put forward, and eventually help reduce that damage that we're incurring. Now, no one holds the ability to see into the future. Certainly not me. And although we can draw on the experiences, our current skill set, the human and technological advancements to plot that aforementioned trajectory, no one can discuss the fact that we are increasing the CO2 levels to such an event that it has a hardened impact on our globe. But I do believe that we will have an opportunity to actually rectify this. Now, when talking about the future of mobility, I've often been sort of met by this look of science fiction disbelief. People say, well, you know, that doesn't sound like it's actually possible. But I'm not discouraged by this anymore, because as when I introduced electrical cars in Norway, there was always an issue on range, on durability, and winter performance, and not least charging, which were huge obstacles. But we overcome them one by one. And now, today, every second car sold in Norway, over 50%, is an electrical car. Now, 10 years ago, they said that was not possible. At the very earliest, it would be 10% in the year 2020. Now, the past century, as this slide shows, has shown us that the adoption of new technology has an exponential timeline. And you can see technologies are being implemented at much, much quicker pace. But even if we go back, and this is one of my favorite slides of all time, this is New York in the year 1900, and you're very hard to find a car. Apparently there is one somewhere up there. And exactly 13 years later, same photo, same street, you have a very hard time finding the horse. Now, point being here, that even 100 years ago, technology within the transportation sector had that potential to change the face of mobility beyond recognition. You know, when the first cars, like the ones you're seeing up here, were introduced, legislatures did not know how to handle these new moving machines, much in the same way as we're seeing today with issues of autonomy or ride-hailing and so forth. Back then, one of the ways that they resolved it was that you had to notify the village constable that you were coming with a car so they could run in front of the car with red flags. Now, I think we've come a little bit further by then, but it does illustrate in some way the way that we will have to tackle the implications of legislative issues. Now, very concrete in regards to the other issues, at least 10 years ago, was the availability of electrical vehicles. And granted, this was indeed an issue. At Tesla, we had a three-phase plan of how to resolve this issue. What we did was we introduced a proof of concept in the shape of the Roadster, which was the one I started promoting back in 2010. And with that, we managed to convince the world, and certainly our investors, that we could take the next step, step 2, which was introducing a sedan called Model S and X, and then eventually going into mass production in the shape of the Model 3. Now, we've taken all those steps in Tesla, and we've certainly shown the world that electrification is something that is going to be the future. And it has convinced all the larger OEMs to change the path forth from combustion engine vehicles to electric. Now, the implementation of autonomy into the technology of vehicles was introduced in the Model S, and it was also flanked by the very publicized Google and Apple autonomous projects that very much eliminated a path of mobility future that was very different to what we know today. And understanding the possibilities of these incredible changes is very paramount to the way that we need to stay on this verge of disruption. Elon Musk laid out a new plan, this time focusing on 4 new areas that was going to change the face of mobility. This plan was laid out about 3 years ago, and it was called the plan number 2, as opposed to the 3-phase plan number 1. And it calls for what he puts on as beautiful storage, expand the major vehicle segments, self-driving, safer, and a car that makes money for you. Now, to sort of focus a little bit on that, firstly, on energy production and storage. Now, we want to ensure that all aspects of transportation here under the energy used to propel vehicles comes from a sustainable force that can be harnessed until it's actually used. Secondly, to expand the technology used in electrical vehicles into other segments, such as the highly polluting heavy transports, or for instance, trucking. And thirdly, implementing the full capacity of autonomous technology in such a way that cars will be able to drive themselves without a driver behind the wheel. And fourthly, using autonomous capabilities to actually generate income. Now, if you think of points 3 and 4, think of what that will actually have of impact on the concept of ownership. It's no secret that most private vehicles are parked over 90% of the time. You know, when you come home, you park it, you go to work, you park it, and it stands still. Autonomy will effectually actually has the potential to activate your car up to 100% of the time. In so doing, obviously challenging the way that we think of ownership. With the adoption of autonomy, we're going to see a wave of different ownership constellations, simply because the car will no longer be sat in one place, but will have the ability to move itself between different users without the need of a driver. You can imagine your co-owned car dropping you and your neighbor off at the train station, then driving off to take your children to the school, perhaps even picking up packages from DHL, or driving old Mrs. Smith to the doctor if needed, and then eventually picking you up again at the station. Now that is a future that is not as far away as you may expect. We're already seeing changes in the likes of Uber, Lyft, and other hailing platforms that instigate a wave of new transport behavior of sharing, and also this car sharing platforms, which are blooming across the world. The ease of catching a ride has never been easier than it is today. And we're seeing a growing demand of sharing rides, not only just to cut costs, but also in an effort to reduce the carbon footprint on everyday transportation. We're also seeing a widening in the utilization of these cars. We're seeing that they are being used to include transportation of small utilization, such as goods and foods and so forth. Now, if you add to this the autonomy part, and you're now going to see the start of this completely new mobility culture like we have not seen before. In fact, we will probably be in the same stage as the photo I showed earlier from New York in the year 1900. Now, seamless mobility, or mobility as a service, as it's also known, is expected to be one of the biggest game changers within the next decade. It's changes within what we call urban mobility. And the elements are, in fact, already existing, but we are trying to put them onto one platform. So services such as trip planning, the aforementioned ride-hailing, ride-sharing, seamless booking, and so forth, is going to be put on platforms that will enable easy payments and will enable us to be able to seamlessly move from one transport method to another. Now, this is already happening. In the same way that Norway, as I mentioned earlier, is almost light years away when it comes to implementation of sustainable transportation, so is, for instance, Finland when it comes to implementation of mobility as a service. In fact, in Helsinki, there are already over 50,000 users of such a platform, and we're seeing other large cities in the EU, here under UK, Germany, Austria, and Belgium, implementing same kind of seamless transport services into their urban transportation. Now, transportation, of course, goes beyond just cars and buses and trucks. It also goes into areas of aviation, of shipping, of agriculture, and many other areas. Now, we're seeing huge R&D budgets being allocated and invested into the aviation industry. Autonomy is not something that's new in aviation. It's been there for almost 50 years in some degree. But of course, we're not limited by the constraints of cars and roads in the air. So it has been a simpler project to implement. However, being one of the biggest CO2 contributors, as well as an industry in enormous growth, it is key to find a new propellant solution for this sector. We're seeing companies such as Lilium and Volocopter who are taking to the skies to form a different kind of urban mobility, an mobility in the sky, which will help reduce strain on traffic on the roads and deliver people even quicker from A to B, again powered by sustainable electrical energy free of all emissions. And as with aviation, large seafaring cargo vessels, having also worked with autonomy for many decades, also have the ability to go electric much, much quicker. We have seen that ships can use wind technology coupled with modern battery technology that can easily take over from the very CO2 emitting diesel engines that they are running today. Agriculture has been under pressure for many decades to reduce its footprint, and of course, naturally, electrification and autonomy within agricultural machinery will have an enormous impact, in particularly in the third world countries that are still working with very inefficient machines. But this does not come without a price tag. One of our biggest challenges, of course, will be to be able to supply the energy. And without an electrical cord, this means that we need to have a lot of batteries. And batteries need to be produced. And there is a race to build manufacturing plants that can sustain this huge growing demand. The slide behind me shows the Tesla Gigafactory 1, which was built and opened in 2014 in Nevada. It has, when it opened, the capacity of the full production of lithium-ion batteries of the globe in 2012. Now, even so, this has already been dwarfed. Since then, several more have sprung up in Tesla, but also many other manufacturing plants have opened throughout Europe, Asia, and Americas. However, my personal concern for that environment is unless we actually find another way or a more sustainable way when it comes to mining of the rare metals that are key ingredients within lithium-ion batteries, it could then also have a detrimental backlash. Nonetheless, battery technology is the means to the electrification, and we will see, and already have seen, an exponential growth, an increase in the energy density of these batteries. This, coupled with an almost same exponential reduction in costs, obviously means that the usage of batteries is becoming more common. I believe that we will soon be seeing alternatives to lithium battery cells, certainly in solid state, that will be able to be even more efficient than what we have today and have a less impact on the environment when it comes to mining the rare metals required. Now, what I've gone through here obviously is to a certain extent showing you the very front of the front year of a potential, and I believe very happening, paradigm shift in the transportation and mobility. It is not a question of if, it is very much a question of when. And I can definitely assure you that coming from someone who's been sitting on the inside and quite literally have peeked under the bonnet into the machine room, that this change is coming quicker than what you may expect. The journey that I've been on over the last 10 years has given me this unique glimpse into this new era of mobility. So, although I'm very concerned about the future, it doesn't necessarily need to be all gloom. I think with a focused mentality from all of us, I believe that we can instigate the change needed. My advice is to adapt and embrace, because the sooner we can overcome this transformation, the quicker we can actually limit the damage to our planet. So with those words, I hope I can open the floor for some questions. So I'll bring the word over to Charlotte. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter, for your presentation and giving us an insight in what you've done at Tesla, and it's really impressive indeed. Perhaps to kick off this kind of Q&A, I have a question as well, because you're saying basically we need to embrace this, we need to adapt and adjust, but habits of people, they're quite sticky and hard to change. So does a company like Tesla also work with psychologists to see how you can really make that change which is needed?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and it is a question that I have been working with for just as many years that I worked in Tesla. But generally, we didn't work with psychologists, as more we worked with politicians. Because at the end of the day, changing the behavior of humans, unfortunately, is very aligned with the use of money or need of money. And therefore, we often see that if you need to instigate change, you also have to couple that with a whip and a carrot. And I use Norway as an example of a country that has changed mobility very, very quickly. And the way that they did that was definitely through policy. They made it more expensive to drive combustion engine vehicles, and at the same time made it extremely cheap to own and drive an electrical car. All the way from no VAT, no charging prices, no parking issues, no ferries for a payment for ferries or tunnels or anything like that. And therefore, it actually made people take that leap. Now, of course, that comes at a cost, but it's a cost that's very small compared to the cost that you can inherit over the many years.
Very good. So you need to act in this broader ecosystem. You need the government support to make this kind of transition.
Very much so,
okay.
yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, is there a question from your side? And if so, if you can please put up your hand, and there will be someone bringing a microphone to you. Yes, there's a question. Okay, so let me have a look. Yeah, a microphone is being brought. Perfect. And if you can please state your name and affiliation, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
I think Thank you very much for the impressive lecture, first of all. My name is Pius. I'm sort of in the lithium-ion battery business. I'm currently working for Energos Power Solutions. We're making battery modules ourselves. And my question would be connected with the price of the lithium-ion batteries. I remember Elon Musk quote saying that a price of $100 per kilowatt hour of lithium-ion batteries is sort of the holy grail. So my question would be, how far are you away from this goal, and what are the main hurdles in reaching it? For example, I saw that whispers of even Tesla trying to get into the mining business to expand laterally in its strategy. So.
Yeah, so good question. The question, of course, being how quickly will we reduce prices? Of course, that is a key element in ensuring that we also can produce cheap electrical cars. But certainly, when we look at the reduction in kilowatt prices in the last 5 years, or 10 years at least, the trajectory says that we will be reaching that level of 100 very shortly. And it's already being reflected in the cost of the Model 3. And we're also seeing other vehicles from other manufacturers at a much lower cost because they are actually being able to implement this lower cost in battery production. And again, with the many more battery manufacturers that are coming, both here in Europe as well as in China, we are going to see a lot more competition, and competition, as you all know, drives costs down.
Exactly. So how important are, ownership of mines, for example? Because a lot of mines are being owned by the Chinese, for example. And of course, we need to have access to these kind of raw materials to be able to create those kind of batteries.
Of course, that is a key element as well, because you could be held at gunpoint if you have monopoly in regards to mining. And as I mentioned in my speech earlier, it is definitely an area that concerns me, not just because of the price, but also the way that mining is being done. And it's my hope that that will be changing, that there's a lot more focus on this, just like we saw 20 years ago in regards to blood diamonds, the way that that was mined, the focus that was brought on that actually also instigated change. And I believe that this focus that is on mining right now also will instigate change, both in the way that mining is being done, but also in regards to ensuring that costs are a lot more fair.
Exactly. So in a way, you're actually dealing with a kind of a green dilemma.
Definitely.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions from the audience? I see a hand over there. If we can bring a microphone again, that would be great.
But in relation to that, of course, as we say in the US, you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. So right now, we're unfortunately in the situation where we're breaking eggs.
Exactly.
But the omelet will be there soon.
Okay, very good. Yes.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. My name is Sarah Medina. I'm from Portugal, and I'm from a private company called SPI. We work in the area of consultancy on science, technology, and innovation. So my question is, across different geographies, where do you see that implementation could be quicker, and what are the main reasons for that? Thank you very much.
Yeah, that, again, an excellent question. Because if you take something like mobile phones in regards to jumping the waves of technology, you can see like in Africa, for instance, where you went directly to mobile phones instead of using your normal old-fashioned landline ones. And I'm pretty confident that we're going to see areas of the globe that will be able to skip. Certainly, it will be in the interest of the Western world to ensure that third world countries can adapt quicker in order to jump over this very, very CO2 heavy gap. But that being said, there's no doubt that the Western world, and in particular the US, the European countries and China, Japan as well, will be some of the quickest to implement, simply because these are nations that are very technologically advanced and this is where the key issue is going to be, they have the infrastructure that's required. Now that is going to be a bit more of a challenge in some of the third world countries, but if we as first world help this introduction in the third world, I believe that they can actually be able to synchronize that adaptation as quickly as we are.
Exactly. So you can create the incentive, you can instigate this change, and then bring this over to third countries as well, and to include them.
And many of these third world countries are usually in areas where there's a lot of sun. So if you can put that together with solar production, as done with Tesla, for instance, setting up solar panels, you can actually make whole countries sustainable on renewable energies.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Any other questions from the audience? Let me have a look. There's a question in the... Oh, you have a microphone already. Perfect.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter, for very fundamental insights on innovation in your field. I am Andrew Zelenas from Invenship, we're a small boutique making inventions by demand, patent, circumvention, and other nasty things. And my question is more on R&D, research and development. How companies should implement their innovation management systems? Should they look in the job market for natural born talents, or they should train inventing thinking skills for the employers inside? Thank you very much.
So if I understood the question correctly, the question is very much about the skills of the workforce.
Exactly.
And I would always say that the best is to train people in the markets, in the areas where you're in. I've always found that, certainly in my time in Tesla, when opening up new markets, that the areas where we had the quickest implementation and the best adoption of that technology was using local workforce. Of course, we had to remove them to train them, but it always gave back much more than just putting that person back. It was like ripples in a pond that spread, and you actually, it's like sowing a seed. And I believe that is definitely the best way to do it, is to train people in the local areas and within the markets, so that they can help grow the rest of that area and market up in such a way that everyone around them actually contributes in the same way.
Exactly, because of course you can have bright ideas of one person or a couple of people about how to innovate in a company like Tesla, but this needs to be carried and executed from the bottom up, of course.
Exactly.
And without proper education, you're not going to get far either for the future, of course.
Yeah.
So do you see changes in this kind of workforce, the educational backgrounds and the interests compared to China or to the US? Are we doing well in Europe?
Well, I'm surprised by the number of reach outs that I get from all over the world. I mean, as late as yesterday, I'm getting an email from a young guy in Nepal asking, oh, you know, when's Tesla opening up, and can I get a job there? And I'm working on battery technology, and this is in Nepal. I'm thinking, wow, you know, and that is thankfully not the only type of that kind of email I get. I get it from all over the world, and that certainly indicates that there are a lot of seeds and a lot of potential out there, and again, something that puts a smile on my face every day and helps reduce that issue that I have with problems of the future, because I believe that the solution definitely lies with our young.
Exactly, because you actually named yourself a veteran, but of course veterans also want to work with youngsters and really transfer their knowledge to them as well.
Definitely.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, there's a question up front over here. Our microphone lady is running like crazy. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. My name is Jānis Stabulnieks from Technology Center Latvia, neighbors. Usually when we are talking about electric cars, the main problem is battery, and you also show new plants and so on. But to do this, to make a car in the motion, you need something else, electric motor and driver. Yeah. And my question is, since it's my technical background, does Tesla doing something or anything in semiconductor technologies? How to improve these drivers? Do you have some research contacts, research laboratories, what else? Since it's also, in my mind, it is security, it is safety and everything. Thank you very much.
So, yeah, thank you. I mean, that is a very technical question. Something that I can't answer, but I do believe and know that we have a very huge research and development part in Tesla that work with efficiency and making sure that the electrical motors used are as efficient as they can be. In fact, the electrical motor in the Model 3 is different from the ones in the Roadster, the Model S and the X, because it's actually gone back where we have been able to make it more efficient of using permanent magnets, and thereby actually making it cheaper, but again, actually more efficient than the earlier motors that we had. And of course, it is an area where we are trying to make, as mentioned, although we're trying to make the density and the output of the batteries better, we are also, of course, making sure that what we're putting that energy into is also as efficient as possible. But again, I'll gladly connect with you later if I can then connect you to some of our tech people, engineering in the US to answer your question more specifically.
Exactly, and I'm sure that's part of your innovation process, right?
Yes.
So you're making these incremental changes before you actually kind of disrupted this whole car manufacturing industry. So you've come a long way already. So do you, as Tesla, do you have a lot of competition?
Well,
because in general, people say competition is good.
I never regarded as competition, and that wasn't because I felt that we were above, but I always requested that we call them colleagues. But also because of much of the time that I worked in Tesla, there was a lot of head shaking from the colleagues.
Yeah.
And
so they want to collaborate with you?
To begin with, back in 2009 and 2010, both Toyota and Mercedes, in fact, invested a lot of money into Tesla. Now, I actually think that they did that just to sort of keep an eye on what was happening. As soon as Tesla started to become popular in 2013, 2014, both Toyota and Mercedes sold all their shares and used that money to do their own research and development. But yeah, I mean, if you want to use the word competition, yeah, there's a lot out there. Everybody who's building a car today is building an electrical car. Now, I do believe that some of them are holding back intentionally in order to not cannibalize too much on their bread and butter business, which is still building combustion engine vehicles. So even the big car manufacturers, the big German car manufacturers who are launching electrical cars, when you actually look at the percentage of the number of cars that they're building as electrical cars, it's still in the single digits compared to their combustion engine vehicle cars.
But that will change.
That is changing. It's
Very
not will,
good.
it is changing. Yeah.
Okay. Another question from the audience. Okay, we have 2 questions, and then I think unfortunately we need to stop. So yes, please.
So hello, I'm Bernardos from Vilnius University, and I have a question for you regarding electrical vehicles in the military. Because as you know, in the US, the military is very prominent, and it uses a lot of oil, a lot of non-renewable fuels. So do you think the military too will transition to electric vehicles, and what is the outlook on Tesla's part?
Well, I am very confident that the militaries throughout the world will change towards electrification, because all the other manufacturers and the subcontractors are doing so. So there's no doubt that they will be changing. In regards to the US military, I can't answer for that. Only I can say that certainly under the current administration, there's no rush to change towards sustainable energy there.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. And a final question up front. Let me have a look where we have the microphone. Yes. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Vladas Lašas, engineer, business angel, happy Tesla driver. What can we do more to support your future vision, Tesla's mission? Right here in Lithuania, the group of the innovators gathering at the conference, government, society, business, they are quite active, enthusiastic people. Probably you saw the video of the teenagers doing Giga factory on Minecraft a few years ago. That's weekend in Lithuania. And other things like we are doing electric vehicle powertrain for the small trucks exporting to Norway and Germany. It's small, still small scale, like Tesla 12 years ago, but it's happening, and we could be happy to support and see your advice.
Well, I think you answered the question yourself. It seems that you're doing all the right things, just like it was with Tesla and just like it is with many of the other startups within sustainable energy, sustainable transport. All these grassroots projects are what actually paves the way. And the only thing I can say is, keep at it. And it seems, certainly from what you just said there, that you're doing exactly the right things. And even though you're starting in the small, and the mere fact that you have so many young talents working in this area has a lot of promise for the future. Now, the Tesla as a company does not do collaborations. It's a little bit protective like that. And all of its research, or most of its research and development, is in the US. But it's always interesting to reach out if there are projects that you feel could actually benefit the companies such as Tesla. Usually they are very quick at getting back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, so we talked about the role of education, very important. We talked about creating the right financial incentives to make this change, to embrace this kind of change. We talked a bit about legislative issues that need to be solved by governments. But of course, infrastructure is very important as well, right? So imagine you drive somewhere with a Tesla and you would want to charge your car. It doesn't make sense to hook it up to a diesel generator. So to what extent are you involved in building infrastructure around the batteries as well?
Well, in my time in Tesla, it was very much a question, certainly in the beginning, of making sure that what we called range anxiety was something of the past. At the time, we resolved this by making our own infrastructure called superchargers. Thankfully, since then, we've seen a lot of private initiatives throughout the world. Here in Europe, one of the biggest energy suppliers and utility companies, E.ON, German, is one of the biggest supplier of electrical charging systems. And we're seeing a huge rollout throughout Europe. We're seeing many, many private companies setting up charging infrastructure. And thankfully, with the help of the EU, we're actually also seeing the usage of the charging infrastructure being aligned throughout all the countries. Therefore, you can use the same systems with the various cars, not just Teslas, but also BMWs and Kias and what have you, so that you have a uniform system where you can charge throughout. So, and also, at the end of the day, all electrical cars can actually charge on a normal AC socket. So in theory, you have charging availability anywhere.
Exactly. So in theory, a lot is possible, but we still have some steps to take to bring it all into practice.
I think it's more a mental block,
Yeah.
because once you start driving an electrical car, you start thinking differently. It was very much, if you remember when the first mobile phones started coming in, they were quite simple. You could ring and perhaps you could send a text, and the longevity of the battery was a week. If anybody can remember that. Today,
We all want to go back.
today it's, yeah, exactly. But today the telephones we have are more like computers, and they use a lot more energy. But we're all used to charging them every day now. Nobody's complaining about it. You know, obviously it's great if you can go a whole day without charging, but at the end of the day, you actually do charge it every day, and perhaps several times a day. You always put it into the plug. Exactly. Now, getting into that mentality of then doing the same with your car, plugging it in at any time, it actually completely, after a couple of weeks, you don't think about this, and the car is always full. Okay. Now, this is going to be less an issue once autonomy becomes a full implemented part of the cars. Exactly. Because the car will just drive off and find an open area for it to be able to charge. And you, as a user or a driver, will never have that issue of not having a car that's charged. You don't have to drive to the gas station because the car has already been there to ensure that the battery is fully charged.
Okay, final question to you, Peter. What is a word of advice from you to this audience with all those innovators here?
It's probably not new, but I would say, you know, keep at it. You know, at the very, things may look bleak, but just keep doing what you're doing. Keep believing in what it is that you're doing. Because eventually something good will always come out of it. I've always worked as an entrepreneur, even within a company, and sometimes things have looked impossible, but just staying at it always ends up being the right thing to do.
Okay, so stay at it, keep believing. Ladies and gentlemen, a big hand to Peter.
Thank you. Thank you.